The smell of floor wax and old mahogany hung heavy in the federal hearing room. The air was heavily filtered, chilled to exactly 68 degrees, and unnervingly quiet. Beyond the thick glass windows, the city traffic was a silent blur of yellow and grey. Inside, the only sound was the low, steady hum of the ventilation system. Terrence Hayes sat perfectly still at the long wooden table. His left knee throbbed with a dull, familiar ache. It was a deep, bone-level throb, the kind that told him rain was coming to the city. He was 58 years old. His hands rested flat on the scarred surface of the table. The skin on his knuckles was thick, mapped with the pale, shiny scars of 40 years, loading commercial laundry trucks and wrestling steel cargo doors. He wore a faded denim jacket, clean but worn at the elbows. Across from him sat Malcolm Briggs, the regional director for Apex Textile Logistics. Briggs wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Terry's monthly pension. The fabric was immaculate. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Next to Briggs were two corporate lawyers. Their briefcases were soft, unmarked leather. Their faces were blank, practiced masks of polite indifference. They did not look at Terry. They looked at their notes. At the head of the table, the federal administrative judge adjusted her reading glasses. The silver chain caught the harsh fluorescent light. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, built by 45 minutes of expensive legal arguments. Terry did not look at the lawyers. He did not look at the judge. He looked directly at Malcolm Briggs. Briggs's jaw was tight. A small muscle feathered near his ear. Terry reached into the breast pocket of his denim jacket. His fingers brushed the worn leather of his wallet. He pulled out a single, small piece of paper. It was pale green. The edges were slightly soft, worn from being folded and unfolded in his pocket over the last 48 hours. He placed it on the table. He slid it across the polished wood with his index finger. It stopped exactly in front of the judge. It was a United States Postal Service certified mail return receipt, the green card, the physical, undeniable proof of delivery. Terry's voice was a low, steady rumble. He did not raise it. He did not need to. The acoustics of the room carried every syllable. Tracking number 7942-alpha. Date of mailing October 12th. Time of stamp 8:14 in the morning. Signature of recipient, facility mailroom clerk. The words hung in the air. They were not shouted. They were simply placed on the table, as heavy and immovable as iron. Briggs shifted in his seat. The expensive leather of his chair creaked. One of the corporate lawyers cleared his throat. He reached for a manila folder, but his hand stopped halfway. The judge looked at the green card. She looked at the tracking number. She looked at the blue ink of the postal stamp. Then she looked at Briggs. The corporate lawyers had spent the last hour arguing that Terry had never filed a formal safety complaint with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They argued he was a disgruntled employee, terminated for cause, trying to extort the company. They argued the timeline was impossible. They argued the green card was a forgery, but the green card did not care about their arguments. The green card only cared about the ink of the postal stamp. The judge closed her folder. The sound was soft, but it echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She looked at Briggs. "Mr. Briggs," she said. Her voice was dry, devoid of any warmth. "You have stated under oath that the appellant never submitted a safety grievance prior to his termination on October 14th. She tapped the green card with her index finger. "The United States Postal Service disagrees with your timeline. The physical evidence before me proves a certified grievance was received by your facility on October 12th. 2 days before you terminated this man." The room was entirely still. Briggs stared at the green card. A thin line of sweat appeared at his temple. The smooth composure of the corporate team was cracking. The judge picked up her pen. The nib hovered over the official order form. The scratch of the pen on paper was loud, deliberate. "I am issuing an immediate order of expungement," she said. "The termination record is sealed. The internal blacklist is dissolved. Apex Textile Logistics will correct the ledger, restore all pension contributions, and pay all back wages within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in federal contempt charges. Terry did not smile. He did not exhale. He simply nodded once. He reached out and took the green card back. He folded it carefully and placed it back in his pocket. If you believe a man who spent his life sweating for the Union deserves to be protected by a piece of paper, not empty promises, stay with this story. Subscribe, because we don't let guys in suits rewrite the history of working men. To understand the weight of that green card, we have to go back 48 hours. The air inside the Apex Textile Logistics loading dock tasted of industrial bleach and hot cotton. The heat was a physical weight, pressing down on the shoulders. Massive tumble dryers roared behind the reinforced glass walls, a constant, vibrating bass note that rattled the teeth. Pallets of freshly pressed hospital linens moved along the conveyor belts in endless, mechanical rhythms. Terry stood at Bay 4. He held a clipboard. The pen hovered over the route manifest for Truck 42. He looked at the truck. He looked at the front left tire. The tread was completely gone. The rubber was bald, smooth as glass, and cracked deep along the sidewall. Terry knew the route. It was 60 miles of mountain highway, mostly downhill, requiring constant braking. A blown tire on that descent, with a truck carrying 2 tons of dry, highly flammable lint and cotton, was not an accident. It was a fire waiting for a spark. Terry lowered the pen. He did not sign the manifest. He walked over to the time clock, punched his union card, and walked toward the glass-walled manager's office. Malcolm Briggs was waiting. Briggs did not look up from his dual monitors. He slid a single sheet of heavy stock paper across the desk. It stopped at the edge, perfectly aligned with Terry's steel-toe boots. Gross misconduct, abandoning the route, insubordination, immediate termination. Terry looked at the typed words. His face remained entirely carved from stone. He did not reach for the paper. Briggs finally looked up. His eyes were flat, calculating. He explained that Truck 42 was critical to the hospital contract. He explained that refusing to drive was a breach of contract. He explained that the company had a zero-tolerance policy for union disruption. The goal was simple: break the local union rep, cut his pension, make an example of the old man. Briggs tapped his manicured fingernail against the desk. He told Terry to sign the paper. If he signed, he would get 2 weeks of severance. If he refused, they would call the police for theft of company time. Terry looked at Briggs' clean, soft hands. Then he looked at the termination paper. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his union card, and placed it on the desk. He picked up the termination paper, folded it neatly in half, and placed it inside his breast pocket. He turned around, walked out of the glass office, and stepped back onto the loud, bleach-scented loading dock. Briggs followed him out. He snatched the carbon copy of the manifest from Terry's clipboard. He tore it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was sharp, cutting through the roar of the dryers. He dropped the pieces onto the concrete floor. "Paper is trash, Terry," Briggs said, his voice a smooth, practiced monotone. "The system is the truth, and the system says you quit." Terry looked at the torn paper on the floor. He looked at the bald tire of Truck 42. He did not say a word. He just walked to the locker room, changed his boots, and walked out into the cold evening air. The squeeze had begun. They thought they could erase a man's livelihood by tearing a piece of paper. They did not realize that the Postal Service still delivered the truth. The city bus smelled of wet wool and diesel exhaust. Terry sat near the back, watching the streetlights blur into long streaks of yellow against the dark, vibrating window. His left knee ached. The physical toll of 40 years on concrete floors was a debt that came due every evening. His mind was not on the anger of the moment. Anger was a luxury he could not afford. His mind was on the math. In a city where the cost of living outpaced wages by a margin of 60%, his union job was not just a paycheck. It was the only shield between his family and the street. His daughter, Sarah, had passed away 4 years ago from a sudden heart condition. She had left him with a small 2-bedroom house and an 8-year-old granddaughter named Maya. Maya had severe chronic asthma. The nebulizer treatments cost money. The inhalers cost money. The only way Terry could afford the comprehensive health insurance was through his union contract. That insurance was strictly tied to his seniority and his active employment status. Losing his job meant losing the coverage. The treatments would stop. Maya's breathing would worsen. The house, which was still in Sarah's name, was 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank had sent the first notice of foreclosure. He had exactly 21 days before the sheriff came to change the locks. Terry unlocked the front door of his small house. The hinges whined in protest. The hallway was dimly lit. From the back bedroom came the rhythmic, mechanical hiss-click of Maya's nebulizer. The sound was a constant reminder of the stakes. He walked into the small kitchen. The linoleum floor was peeling at the corners. He placed his keys on the counter. He did not turn on the lights. He just stood in the dark, listening to the machine breathe for his granddaughter. The next evening, after his shift at a temporary day labor site, Terry walked 3 blocks to Miss Loretta's diner. The bell above the door chimed. The air inside smelled of frying cornbread, dark roast coffee, and old grease. It was a warm, heavy smell that coated the back of the throat. Miss Loretta stood behind the counter. She was 65, a woman who had worked the floor of this diner for 40 years. She wore a white apron that was spotless despite the environment. She saw Terry walk in. She did not ask about his shift. She did not ask about the termination. She simply turned to the grill, plated a massive slice of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and gravy, and slid it across the counter. Terry sat on a vinyl stool at the far end of the counter. Next to him sat Deacon Willis. Willis was 70, a retired union rep who still wore his faded local cap. Willis was reading a racing form, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. Willis did not look up from the paper. He just slid the sugar dispenser an inch toward Terry. It was a small gesture, a silent acknowledgement. The kind of quiet companionship that older men share when the world has tried to break them both. Terry picked up his fork. The warmth of the food grounded him. Miss Loretta poured a cup of black coffee and set it down next to his plate. She patted his shoulder once. Her hand was dry and warm. The diner was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerators and the low murmur of the evening regulars. Terry ate slowly. He looked at the reflection in the dark window. He saw a man who was tired, but he was not beaten. Not yet. The rain in the city was cold, a freezing, relentless drizzle that settled deep into the joints and refused to leave. Terrence Hayes stood outside the glass doors of a temporary staffing agency on the south side of town. The heating inside the small office was blasting, but Terry felt a deep, persistent chill in his bones. His left knee throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. It was the kind of pain that told him the barometric pressure was dropping, the kind of pain that came from 40 years of standing on concrete loading docks and wrestling steel cargo doors. He walked up to the counter. The agency manager was a young man in a tight branded polo shirt. He did not look up immediately. His fingers tapped rapidly on a plastic keyboard. "Name and social," the young man said, his voice flat, practiced. "Terrence Hayes," Terry said. He slid his union card across the counter. The laminate was worn, the edges peeling. The young man typed. He frowned. He tapped a few more keys. He turned the monitor slightly, squinting at the screen. The harsh blue light reflected in his glasses. "Sorry, Mr. Hayes," the young man said. He did not sound sorry. "The system is kicking you back. It says you are flagged for a severe safety violation. Uninsurable liability. We cannot place you in any warehouse or driving role." Terry did not raise his voice. He kept his hands flat on the counter. The young man hesitated. He looked at the screen, then up at Terry. "Apex Textile Logistics. It is a regional supply chain alert. It covers the entire tri-state area. I cannot override it. The insurance underwriters will not allow it." Terry nodded slowly. He took his union card back. The plastic felt cold against his thumb. He walked out of the office and back into the freezing rain. He tried 3 more places that afternoon: a food bank logistics dispatcher, a private linen service, a medical supply courier. Every single time the result was exactly the same. The manager would type his name. The screen would flash red. The answer would be no. Malcolm Briggs was not just firing him. He was erasing him. He was poisoning the well across the entire commercial transport grid. The digital blacklist was a wall of invisible glass, and Terry was trapped on the outside. When Terry returned to his small house, the mailbox was overflowing. He pulled out 3 envelopes. They were heavy, crisp, and white. The gold logo of Apex Textile Logistics was embossed on the front. He stood in the dim hallway and opened the first envelope. Notice of pension review. The letter cited a uniform code violation from 9 years ago, a missing name tag. The penalty was a deduction of 2% from his final payout. He opened the second envelope, disciplinary addendum. It cited a late time card punch from 6 years ago. 3 minutes late after a lunch break. The penalty was the forfeiture of 1 week of accrued vacation pay. He opened the third envelope. Final severance calculation. It cited the cost of a torn nylon cargo strap from 2 years ago. They were charging him $45 for the replacement. They were using micro-infractions. They were digging up a decade of perfect, minor imperfections, weaponizing the employee handbook to legally justify stripping his pension down to the bone. It was a slow, bureaucratic violence. It was designed to make him feel crazy. It was designed to make him feel like the system was working exactly as intended, and he was simply the error. Terry placed the 3 letters on the kitchen counter. His hands were steady. His face was carved from stone. But his chest felt tight, like a cargo strap pulled to the absolute breaking point. The air in the house felt thin. He looked at the letters. The ink was black, sharp, and entirely devoid of mercy. They thought they could bury him under a mountain of paper. They forgot that he knew how to read the weight of it. The house was cold. The thermostat on the wall was set to 62 degrees, but the old furnace in the basement only blew lukewarm, dusty air. The heating oil tank was nearly empty. Terry had put in $50 last week, but the cold front moving in from the north was draining the tank faster than he could fill it. From the back bedroom, the sound came. Hiss-click, 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 the nebulizer. Maya was breathing, but it was a shallow, rattling sound. The damp, creeping cold in the house was triggering her asthma. The machine pushed the mist into the plastic mask, a steady, mechanical rhythm that kept her lungs open. It was the sound of survival. And it cost money. The medication vials cost money. The electricity to run the compressor cost money. Terry sat at the small Formica kitchen table. The linoleum floor was freezing against the thick, rubber soles of his steel-toe boots. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. The screen had a spiderweb crack across the glass, a jagged line that distorted the icons. He opened the banking app. He waited for the loading circle to spin. The numbers glowed in the dim light of the kitchen. $14.12. The mortgage payment was due in 9 days. The bank's automated voice had called twice yesterday, a polite, robotic voice reminding him that his account was severely delinquent. In a city where the median home price had tripled in 10 years, this small, peeling house on the east side was the only anchor his family had left. It was the house his daughter Sarah had bought. It was the house she had died in. After the hospital sent her home because the insurance ran out, Terry closed his eyes. The darkness behind his eyelids smelled of hospital antiseptic and the faint, sweet scent of Sarah's vanilla perfume. He remembered the last day in the ICU. He remembered holding her thin, cold hand. Her skin was like parchment. He remembered the promise he made, his voice cracking, his forehead resting against her knuckles. "I got her, Sarah. I got Maya. I will not let her fall. I swear it." He opened his eyes. The kitchen was dark, save for the pale, ghostly glow of the cracked phone screen. The nebulizer hissed and clicked in the next room. His left knee throbbed, a deep, bone-level ache that radiated up his thigh. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against the cold Formica table. The physical weight of the house, the debt, the blacklist, the cold, pressed down on his shoulders. He was 58 years old. His body was failing, his bank account was empty. And the men in the glass offices, the men who had never loaded a single truck or fixed a single boiler, thought they had won. They thought he would just fade away. You guys know this table. You have sat at it, staring at a number that does not add up, wondering where the years went, wondering if the sweat was worth it. If you have ever carried the weight of a promise to a ghost, leave a like. Let the algorithm know that men like Terry are still here, and we do not break easy. The next morning, the sky was the color of wet concrete. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick and damp. Terry walked the 4 blocks to Miss Loretta's diner. The bell above the door chimed, a bright, brassy sound. The smell of frying bacon, dark roast coffee, and old grease hit him. It was a warm, heavy smell that coated the back of the throat. It smelled like safety. Miss Loretta was at the grill. She wore her spotless white apron. She saw Terry walk in. She did not ask about the rain. She did not ask about the bank. She did not ask about the letters on the counter. She just poured a mug of black coffee and slid it onto the counter. She placed a heavy slice of warm cornbread on a small plate next to it. Terry sat on his usual vinyl stool at the far end of the counter. The vinyl was cracked, taped over with silver duct tape. He wrapped his large, calloused hands around the hot mug. The warmth seeped into his palms. 2 stools down sat Sam Jenkins. Sam was 65, a retired federal labor inspector for the National Labor Relations Board. He wore a faded red flannel shirt and reading glasses on a silver chain. His hands were stained with ink and tobacco. He was reading a physical newspaper, the paper rustling in the quiet diner. Sam was a man who believed in the weight of things. He believed in paper. He believed in the law, not the screen. Sam did not look up from the sports section. He just reached down into his canvas tote bag beside his stool. He pulled out a thick yellow form and a pale green envelope. He slid them across the Formica counter. They stopped right next to Terry's coffee mug. Terry looked at them. The yellow form was an OSHA safety grievance. The green envelope was for certified mail. Return, receipt requested. I cannot sign your name, Terry, Sam said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like tires on gravel, and I cannot file it for you. The law says it has to come from the aggrieved party. If I touch it, they will claim coercion. Sam finally looked up. He folded his newspaper. His eyes were sharp, clear, and entirely devoid of pity. Pity was useless. Pity did not pay mortgages. But I know which box needs the X, Sam said. And I know the postal clerk at the main branch stamps the green card at exactly 8:15 in the morning, before the corporate mailroom at Apex opens. If you drop it in the slot at 8:20, the federal timestamp beats their internal clock by 4 hours. That makes it a protected filing. Terry ran his thumb over the yellow paper. The paper was heavy, textured. It felt real. It felt like a weapon. They think the screen is the only truth, Terry, Sam said, picking up his coffee. But the Postal Service still deals in ink, and ink does not glitch. Terry nodded slowly. He picked up the forms. He left a crumpled dollar bill on the counter and walked out into the damp morning air. He did not go home. He walked to the detached garage in the backyard. The air inside smelled of motor oil, damp wood, and old cardboard. It was the smell of his father. It was the smell of work. Terry walked to the metal workbench in the back. He pulled open the bottom drawer. It was filled with oily rags, rusted spark plugs, and loose screws. He reached deep into the back, behind a heavy steel socket set. His fingers brushed against thick, stiff paper. He pulled it out. It was a carbon copy route manifest, the pink copy. He had slipped it into his jacket pocket yesterday, right before Briggs tore the digital clipboard copy in half. Briggs had deleted the digital log. He had torn the top white copy. But he forgot that Terry was the senior route dispatcher. Terry kept the pink carbon copies of every refused dispatch in his personal bag. It was a habit from 30 years ago, a habit of a man who knew that systems fail. Terry laid the pink paper flat on the greasy workbench. He clicked on a harsh LED work light. The bright white beam cut through the gloom of the garage, illuminating the dust motes in the air. He looked at the bottom of the manifest, right where the driver was supposed to sign off on the pre-trip inspection. There was no driver signature, but there was a handwritten note in the margin, in Terry's own blue ink. The ink was pressed deep into the fibers of the paper. Truck 42. Front left tire bald. Refused dispatch. Time, 1400 hours. Signed, T. Hayes. Terry ran his thumb over the blue ink. The ink was slightly raised. It caught the light. Briggs had built a digital fortress to hide his lie. He had blacklisted Terry's name. He had sent the micro-infraction letters. He thought he had erased the truth. But the physical truth was sitting on a greasy workbench in a cold garage. The ghost of Terry's pen stroke was trapped in the pink carbon paper. The trap was set. Terry folded the pink paper carefully. He placed it inside the green certified mail envelope. He sealed it tight. He was not just a fired driver anymore. He was a man with a receipt. And the Postal Service was about to deliver it. The smell of old paper and stale coffee filled the back booth of Miss Loretta's diner. It was past midnight. The neon sign in the window buzzed, casting a flickering red glow over the Formica table. Terrence Hayes sat with a stack of pink carbon copies and a blue ballpoint pen. His left knee throbbed, a deep, rhythmic ache that matched the hum of the refrigerators. He was not alone. Deacon Willis sat across from him, reading a racing form, but keeping a watchful eye on the door. Miss Loretta was at the counter, wiping down the espresso machine, but every 20 minutes she would walk over and refill Terry's mug without asking. It was the silent companionship of people who knew what it meant to stand in the gap. Terry pulled the next sheet from his canvas bag. It was a signed affidavit from a driver named Marcus. Marcus had driven truck 42 for 3 years. The signature was heavy, the pen pressed deep into the paper. Terry counted the sheets. 14 drivers, 14 signatures. All of them confirming that truck 42 had a history of front left tire blowouts. All of them confirming that Malcolm Briggs had a habit of overriding safety inspections to keep the hospital contract running. Terry lined the pink pages up on the table. The edges were frayed, the paper stiff with age and grease. This was not a digital file. You could not delete a pink carbon copy with a keystroke. You could not alter the physical weight of 14 men telling the truth. Next, he opened a manila folder containing the fuel logs he had pulled from the public transit way stations. He cross-referenced the dates. October 13th, the day after he was fired. The day after he refused to drive the bald tires. He ran his calloused finger down the column of numbers. Truck 42. Fuel purchased at the Route 9 way station at 0600 hours. 42 gallons of diesel. Terry stopped. His finger rested on the number, 42 gallons. That was enough fuel to drive 60 miles down the mountain highway and back. They had driven it. After he refused, after he was fired, Briggs had sent another driver down the mountain with a truck that was a rolling bomb. If the tire had blown, if the cotton lint had caught a spark, the driver would have burned alive, and Briggs would have blamed it on a mechanical failure. Terry carefully placed the fuel log next to the 14 affidavits. The chain of evidence was no longer just a refusal. It was a documented pattern of criminal negligence. The bell above the diner door chimed. Terry looked up. Maya stood in the doorway. She was wearing her yellow raincoat, though it was not raining. She held a small, folded piece of notebook paper in her hand. Her breathing was shallow, the faint whistle of her asthma audible even from 10 feet away. Terry's chest tightened. He quickly swept the pink pages into the canvas bag, hiding the war behind the zipper. He stood up, his knee popping loudly in the quiet diner. Maya walked over to the booth. She did not say anything. She just climbed onto the vinyl seat next to Deacon Willis and slid the folded paper across the table to Terry. Terry opened it. It was a drawing, a crude, beautiful sketch of a large freight truck drawn in thick blue crayon. Beneath the truck, in shaky, uneven letters, was one word, truck. Terry stared at the word. The blue crayon was pressed so hard it had nearly torn the paper. It was the same blue ink he used on his manifests. It was the color of his truth. He reached out and touched Maya's head. Her hair was soft, smelling of baby shampoo and the damp night air. The whistle in her chest eased, just a fraction, as she leaned against his arm. Miss Loretta walked over. She placed a small plate on the table. a slice of warm cornbread, dripping with honey. She did not make a fuss. She just patted Maya's shoulder and went back to the counter. Terry took a bite of the cornbread. The sweetness grounded him. The ache in his knee faded into the background. He looked at the drawing, then at the canvas bag at his feet. Briggs thought he had erased Terry. He thought the blacklist was a wall that no old man could climb. But Briggs did not understand the architecture of a union hall. He did not understand that when you push a man who has nothing left to lose, you do not break him. You give him the leverage to bring the whole building down. We are the people who keep the receipts when the men in power expect us to throw them away. We are the ones who remember the weight of the paper. If that is who you are, if you believe that a working man's signature is worth more than a billionaire's lie, subscribe to this channel. Because the men in the glass offices are about to make a very expensive mistake. The mistake arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a courier in a brown uniform. Terry was in the kitchen, trying to fix the hinge on Maya's nebulizer case with a small screwdriver. The mail slot in the front door clacked. A thick, heavy envelope slid across the linoleum floor and stopped against his steel-toe boot. The return address was embossed in gold foil. Sterling, Vance and Croft, attorneys at law, the outside counsel for Apex Textile Logistics. Terry set down the screwdriver. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag and picked up the envelope. It was heavy. The paper was thick, expensive cotton stock. It felt like a brick. He carried it to the kitchen table. He did not open it immediately. He listened to the hiss-click of the nebulizer in the next room. He looked at the stack of past-due notices on the counter. The physical weight of the envelope seemed to pull the gravity in the room downward. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside were 10 pages of dense, legal text. The font was small, the margins narrow. It was a cease and desist order, combined with a final notice of termination and a demand for damages. Terry sat down. He put on his reading glasses. The lenses were scratched, but he could make out the sharp, black letters. He read the first page. They were accusing him of tortious interference. They claimed his refusal to drive had cost the company a $3 million hospital contract. He turned to the second page. Defamation of character. They claimed he had spread malicious lies about the safety of their fleet, damaging the corporate reputation. He turned to the third page. The demand for damages. $5 million. Terry's face remained entirely carved from stone. His heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, but his hands did not shake. He had stared down loading dock Forfman, who swung tire irons. He had watched his daughter fade away in a hospital bed while an insurance adjuster denied a claim on the phone. A piece of paper from a law firm did not scare him, but he read every word. He was a route dispatcher. His job was to read the fine print on a manifest. His job was to find the error in the load. He turned to the fifth page, the legal justification. This was where the lawyers laid out the timeline. This was where they built the fortress to protect Malcolm Briggs. They needed to prove that Terry's safety complaint was baseless, retaliatory, and filed after his employment had already been severed. Terry ran his finger down the page. He read the paragraph slowly. The text read, "The appellant, Terrence Hayes, has made false and defamatory claims that he reported a safety violation regarding Truck 42 prior to his termination. However, internal corporate records confirm that Mr. Hayes was terminated for gross insubordination on October 14th. Furthermore, our audit of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration portal confirms that Mr. Hayes never submitted any formal grievance, safety report, or certified mailing prior to his final discharge on October 14th. Any claim to the contrary is a fabrication designed to extort this company." Terry stopped reading. He took off his reading glasses. He placed them on the table. The room was completely silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He looked at the 10 pages of legal threats. $5 million. Tortious interference. Defamation. They were trying to bury him under a mountain of paper. They were trying to use the sheer weight of the legal system to crush him into silence before he could reach the federal hearing. They wanted him to look at the $5 million price tag, look at his $14 bank account, and fold. Terry reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers brushed the worn leather of his wallet. He pulled out a single small piece of paper. It was pale green. The edges were slightly soft. He placed the green card on the table, right next to the 10 pages of legal threats. The green card was the certified mail return receipt from the United States Postal Service. Terry looked at the date on the green card, October 12th. He looked at the date on the legal threat, October 16th. A slow, cold calm washed over him. The rigid tension in his shoulders dissolved. The ache in his knee vanished. Malcolm Briggs and his expensive lawyers thought they were writing a shield. They thought they were building a wall of legal jargon to keep Terry out. But they had just written a confession. Terry picked up the legal threat. He held it in his left hand. He picked up the green postal receipt with his right. He looked at the two pieces of paper. The contrast was physical. The legal threat was thick, heavy, printed on expensive cotton stock. It was the paper of power. It was the paper of men who billed by the hour in 6-minute increments. The green card was thin, cheap, printed on standard cardstock. It was the paper of the working class. It was the paper of the postal clerk who stamped it at 8:14 in the morning. Terry read the lawyer's paragraph again. Our audit of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration portal confirms that Mr. Hayes never submitted any formal grievance prior to his final discharge on October 14th. Terry tapped the green card with his index finger. The postal stamp was blue, the ink was sharp. The date was October 12th. By sending this letter, Sterling, Vance and Croft had just put in writing, under the threat of federal perjury, that Terry had not filed a grievance before the 14th. They had explicitly stated that their audit showed no prior filing, but the United States Postal Service did not use the corporate portal. The Postal Service used a physical stamp, and the physical stamp said October 12th. Terry leaned back in his chair. The vinyl creaked. This was the boomerang. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. When a billionaire's proxy tries to bury the truth, they always overreach. They always try to add one more layer of concrete. They always send one more letter to make sure the victim is truly scared. But in doing so, they create a new document. And that new document becomes part of the record. Briggs had not just sent a threat. He had sent a sworn written contradiction of a federal postal record. He had taken the timeline of his lie and locked it into a legal affidavit. If Terry had just shown up to the hearing with the green card, the lawyers could have argued it was a glitch. They could have claimed the postal clerk made a mistake. They could have spun a story about the corporate portal being down. But now they had gone on the record. They had explicitly denied the October 12th filing. If Terry produced the green card in the hearing room, the lawyers would not just lose the case. They would be exposed as having submitted false testimony to a federal administrative judge. The penalty for perjury in a federal labor hearing was not a fine, it was prison. Terry looked at the 10 pages of threats, $5 million. He smiled. It was a small, tight smile. It did not reach his eyes. They thought the law was a weapon they could buy. They thought a threat was just words on expensive paper. But they forgot that the Postal Service still deals in ink, and ink does not glitch. A threat is just a confession written on expensive paper, and Malcolm Briggs had just signed his own. Terry carefully folded the 10 pages of the legal threat. He placed them back inside the heavy envelope. He placed the green postal receipt inside his wallet, right next to the photo of his daughter. He stood up. His knee did not ache. His back was straight. He walked to the back bedroom. Maya was asleep. The nebulizer had finished its cycle. The room was quiet. Terry stood in the doorway for a long time. He watched the rise and fall of her small chest. Her breathing was steady. The whistle was gone. He had the evidence. He had the timeline. He had the confession. All he had to do was walk into the federal hearing room and put 2 pieces of paper on the table. If you want to know how one old man used a $5 million threat to put a billionaire's proxy in a federal chokehold, do not leave now. Because the look on their faces when the judge reads the date on that green card is worth every second of the wait. The federal hearing room was exactly as cold and quiet as it had been 48 hours ago. The smell of floor wax and old mahogany hung heavy in the air. The ventilation system hummed its low, steady note. Terrence Hayes sat at the long wooden table. His left knee throbbed, a deep rhythmic ache that matched the hum of the lights. He wore the same faded denim jacket. His hands rested flat on the scarred surface. Across from him, Malcolm Briggs and his two corporate lawyers looked entirely different. The smooth, practiced composure they had worn during the initial arguments was gone. Briggs's jaw was locked tight. The skin around his eyes was pale. One of the lawyers, a tall man with a silver tie clip, was shuffling a stack of papers. The sound of the thick paper sliding against itself was nervous, erratic. At the head of the table, the federal administrative judge adjusted her reading glasses. She looked at Terry. She waited. Terry did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He reached into his canvas bag. He pulled out the thick, heavy envelope from Sterling, Vance and Croft. The gold foil logo caught the harsh fluorescent light. He placed it on the table. He slid it across the polished wood. It stopped exactly in front of the judge. Then Terry reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out the pale green certified mail return receipt. He placed it on the table, right next to the heavy envelope. Terry's voice was a low, steady rumble. It carried the weight of 40 years on concrete floors. "Your Honor," Terry said, "the respondent's legal counsel sent me a cease and desist order, dated October 16th. On page 5, paragraph 3, they state under penalty of perjury that I never submitted any formal safety grievance prior to my termination on October 14th. Terry tapped the pale green card with his thick, calloused index finger. "This is the United States Postal Service certified mail receipt. The tracking number is 7942-Alpha. The postal stamp is dated October 12th. The time of stamp is 8:14 in the morning." The room was entirely still. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation. Terry looked directly at the tall lawyer with the silver tie clip. "Your legal team went on the federal record to deny a timeline that the United States Postal Service has physically stamped in blue ink. You did not just deny my grievance. You submitted a fabricated timeline to a federal administrative judge." The tall lawyer stopped shuffling his papers. His hand froze in the air. He looked at the green card. He looked at the heavy envelope. He looked at Malcolm Briggs. Briggs was not looking at the lawyers. He was staring at the green card. A single drop of sweat broke from his hairline and tracked slowly down his temple. His expensive charcoal suit suddenly looked like it did not fit him. The judge picked up the heavy envelope. She opened it. She pulled out the 10 pages of legal threats. She turned to page 5. Her eyes scanned the dense text. She read the paragraph. She looked at the date, October 16th. She put the pages down. She picked up the green card. She looked at the blue postal stamp, October 12th. The judge took off her reading glasses. She placed them on the table. The sound of the glasses hitting the wood was sharp, final. She looked at Malcolm Briggs. Her voice was dry, devoid of any warmth, carrying the absolute authority of the federal government. "Mr. Briggs," the judge said, "your counsel has submitted a sworn affidavit to this tribunal, claiming no prior grievance existed. The physical evidence before me proves a certified grievance was mailed and received 4 days before you terminated this man." The judge leaned forward. The fluorescent light reflected in her lenses. "This is not a discrepancy. This is a false statement on the federal record." The tall lawyer cleared his throat. It was a weak, dry sound. "Your Honor, the internal audit of the portal was," the lawyer stammered. His voice lacked all its previous expensive polish. "The portal is not the Postal Service," the judge interrupted. Her voice did not rise, but it cut through the room like a steel blade. "The United States Postal Service operates on physical timestamps. Your client's legal counsel has just admitted to either gross incompetence or deliberate perjury." The judge picked up her pen. She pulled the official order form toward her. The scratch of the pen on the thick paper was loud, deliberate, and absolute. "I am issuing an immediate order of expungement," the judge said. "The termination record is sealed and destroyed. The regional supply chain blacklist is dissolved by federal mandate. Apex Textile Logistics will correct the ledger, restore all pension contributions, and pay all back wages within 72 hours. Furthermore, I am referring the false affidavit submitted by your counsel to the Federal Inspector General for review." She signed the bottom of the form. She stamped it with the heavy brass seal of the court. The thud of the stamp echoed in the quiet room. She looked at Terry. "Mr. Hayes, your record is clean. Your pension is restored. You are free to go." Terry did not smile. He did not exhale. He simply nodded once. He reached out and took the green card back. He folded it carefully. He placed it inside his wallet, right next to the photograph of his daughter. He stood up. His left knee popped, but the deep, bone-level ache was gone. He walked out of the hearing room. He did not look back at Malcolm Briggs. He did not look at the expensive lawyers. They were already packing their briefcases, their voices low, their careers suddenly hanging by a thread. Terry walked down the marble hallway of the federal building. The heavy oak doors closed behind him. He stepped out into the city air. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue. The wind was cold, but it felt clean. He did not ask for their pity. He just asked them to read the record. If you respect a man who demands the truth on paper, leave a like right now. Let the algorithm know that working men still keep the receipts. The bell above the door of Miss Loretta's diner chimed. It was a bright, brassy sound that cut through the low hum of the refrigerators. The air inside smelled of frying cornbread, dark roast coffee, and old grease. It was a warm, heavy smell that coated the back of the throat. It smelled like safety. Terry walked in. He did not go to his usual stool at the far end of the counter. He walked straight to the back booth, the one with the silver duct tape on the vinyl seat. Miss Loretta looked up from the grill. She saw his face. She saw the way his shoulders sat, lower and looser than they had been in a week. She did not ask what happened. She did not ask about the federal building. She just turned to the counter, poured a large mug of black coffee, and placed a massive slice of warm cornbread on a small plate. She carried it over to the booth and set it down. Terry sat down. He wrapped his large, calloused hands around the hot mug. The warmth seeped into his palms, chasing away the chill of the federal building. In the corner of the diner, at a small table near the window, Maya was sitting. She was wearing her yellow raincoat. She had a piece of notebook paper and a blue crayon. She was drawing. Terry listened. The hiss-click of the nebulizer was not there. The shallow, rattling whistle in her chest was gone. Her breathing was quiet, steady and deep. The damp cold of the house had not triggered her asthma today. The union health insurance had been reinstated retroactively. The medication was covered. The machine was sitting on the kitchen counter at home, silent and unused. Maya looked up. She saw her grandfather. She smiled. She lifted the notebook paper and held it up. It was a drawing of a large freight truck. But this time, beneath the truck, she had drawn a small, green rectangle. Terry looked at the green rectangle. It was a certified mail receipt. She had seen it on the kitchen table. She had drawn it in green crayon. Terry's chest tightened. The rigid line of his jaw softened. He took a bite of the cornbread. The sweetness grounded him. The bell chimed again. Deacon Willis walked in. He wore his faded Union local cap. He walked over to the booth and slid into the seat across from Terry. Sam Jenkins was right behind him. The retired federal labor inspector slid into the seat next to Deacon. Neither of them asked about the hearing. They just sat there. The silent companionship of men who had stood in the gap. Deacon Willis reached into his heavy wool coat. He pulled out a thick white envelope. He slid it across the Formica table. The return address was the First National Bank. Terry looked at the envelope. He did not open it immediately. He looked at Deacon Willis. "The loan officer called me an hour ago," Deacon Willis said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "The federal expungement order triggered an automatic review of your hardship file. The foreclosure notice is withdrawn." The mortgage is being restructured under the Federal Worker Protection Clause. The house is safe, Terry. Terry ran his thumb over the thick white envelope. The paper was crisp. The ink was black. It was not a promise. It was a corrected ledger. Sam Jenkins poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot. Miss Loretta had just set on the table. He took a slow sip. They thought they could erase you with a computer screen, Sam said. His eyes were sharp, clear, but they forgot that the world still runs on paper, and paper has weight. Terry nodded slowly. He reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out his worn leather wallet. He opened it. He took out the pale green certified mail receipt. He looked at the blue postal stamp, October 12th. He did not put it back in his pocket. He placed it carefully inside the wallet, sliding it into the clear plastic sleeve right next to the photograph of his daughter, Sarah. It was no longer just a piece of evidence. It was a shield. It was a receipt of survival. Terry closed the wallet. He took another sip of the dark, bitter coffee. The radiator in the corner of the diner hissed. The refrigerator hummed. The diner was small, warm, and entirely ordinary. There were no cameras. There were no headlines. There was no billionaire waiting in the wings to offer a quiet settlement. There was only a grandfather, a breathing granddaughter, a plate of cornbread, and the profound, unshakable peace of a record that had been corrected. Ink does not lie, and the Postal Service never forgets. There are men in this country who spend their entire lives moving the weight of the world. They load the trucks. They fix the boilers. They dispatch the routes. They stand on concrete floors for 12 hours a night while the city sleeps above them. They are told that their names are just entries in a digital ledger. They are told that a keystroke can erase 40 years of sweat. They are told that power lives in the cloud, in the server, in the screen that only the manager can see. But the screen is a ghost. It only shows you what the man in the office wants you to see. The truth lives in the paper. It lives in the carbon copy that remembers the pressure of the hand. It lives in the fuel receipt that proves the truck was moving. It lives in the pale green card from the Postal Service that locks a lie into a federal timestamp. It lives in the hands of a grandfather who kept the receipt because his own father taught him that paper has weight, and weight cannot be deleted. Terrence Hayes did not win because he was louder. He did not win because he had more money. He won because he understood something that billionaires consistently forget. Power can alter the record. Power can delete the file. Power can send a 10-page threat on expensive cotton paper. But power cannot unstamp the postal mark. The moment a proxy puts pen to paper, the moment a corporation sends a certified threat, the moment a thief writes a receipt for the thing they stole, they have created a physical monument to their own guilt, and that monument does not expire. Most people scroll past stories like this. They want the spectacle. They want the shouting match, the courtroom drama, the billionaire in handcuffs. But real justice rarely looks like that. Real justice looks like a corrected ledger. It looks like an expungement order stamped in blue ink. It looks like a grandfather walking back into a diner with his name intact and his granddaughter breathing easy. Real justice is quiet, it is written, and it waits in a wallet until someone has the patience to pull it out and read it aloud. If you have ever kept a receipt that someone told you to throw away, if you have ever held onto a piece of paper because you knew the screen was lying, then this story belongs to you. You are the men who remember the weight of the paper. Leave a comment and tell me the one document you kept in your wallet that changed everything. And subscribe if you believe that truth has a paper trail, and that trail does not fade.